Hey DC foodies! Tired of guessing where to eat next? Meet Tasty, the app that helps you find the best dishes worth ordering using real receipt data instead of star ratings. See where people actually spend their money, what they order, and what it costs before you go. Whether you're looking for date night, lunch, or pizza nearby, Tasty helps you decide. Download Tasty at jointasty.com and scan your first receipt. That's Tasty with an I.
Today on CityCast DC, there is a new organization that plans to fight for DC's rights by going into congressional districts to unseat Republicans. Defend DC was announced this week by Robert White, who is all but certain to be DC's next congressional delegate. Ike Allen just profiled White in Washingtonian. He's here to explain both the PAC and its organizer. Today is Wednesday, August 26th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Ike, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So you did a pretty long and interesting profile of Robert White, who's a DC council member. He's all but certain to be DC's next congressional delegate. And then after you published, you went and made some news, which is that on Monday, he announced or convened, or whatever you want to call it, this new organization called Defend DC, which is, as I understand it, a PAC. What is it supposed to do?
Yeah, I mean, he'd been kind of floating this idea, and I'd heard sort of tell about it when I was working on the profile. I mentioned it, but he really didn't want to give out any details until yesterday. I went down to Freedom Plaza where he was addressing a small crowd of people, I would say, but a couple of his fellow council members were there, including his one-time opponent, Brooke Pinto. And it's called Defend DC. It also seems to be called DC 51. And those seem to have different purposes, but I'm not sure exactly what the difference is. Defend DC is the name of the PAC. DC 51 seems to be like the project that they're aiming to accomplish. Defend DC sort of sounds like it would be just fighting back against Republican attacks. Mm-hmm. DC 51 sounds like it's about statehood. And I guess it is both. He described the first step as basically winning back the House for Democrats, winning the Senate, hopefully. And the way that they're going to marshal DC's resources for that is get people on buses, basically, and driving their own cars to swing districts that are within driving distance of the city, and get DC residents advocating on behalf of statehood and DC autonomy for voters in these districts. And the first one they're going to do, which is on Labor Day weekend, is the 5th District in Virginia, which includes Charlottesville, Danville, I think, parts of like Southern Virginia. It's currently John McGuire is the congressman. He's a Republican. He introduced the Make DC Safe and Beautiful Act, which codified the Trump executive order. Tom Perriello is a Democrat, is running against him. So it's kind of a symbolic one because it's not very far from here. And this Republican is someone who has specifically sort of targeted DC autonomy in the House.
Let me understand this. You defend DC's, the current home rule, and maybe you set the grounds for statehood by helping the Democratic Party nationally win the House of Representatives. And that means going to districts and helping defeat Republicans.
That's the idea.
There's a history here. I mean, not in the same partisan way, but people from DC, when DC had no home rule, went down to South Carolina and into the district of the sort of then segregationist Democrat who oversaw the committee that oversaw DC, and helped defeat him. But America and our politics are pretty different right now. Districts are drawn in a fairly partisan way. Charlottesville, maybe beloved Charlottesville, but that district is pretty red. I mean, is it going to actually maybe help him to have a bunch of like people who I'm sure they will characterize as like angry, entitled DC insiders, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there are way fewer swing districts now than there were then. And I mean, this one seems to be genuinely pretty close from what I can tell. Tom Perriello released a poll.
Former congressman.
Yes, that showed it being pretty close, although it did show McGuire, the Republican, ahead. There is just that fact that most people in America don't really know much about DC's situation. I lived in California for a while. People didn't even really understand that DC had residents, some people that I talked to, or that it was a city beyond the federal enclave. I think part of what their idea is sort of educating people about the situation DC is in, the disenfranchisement of 700,000 people who live here. I think there's a question as to whether people care about that who live in other parts of the country. And even if you explain to them that all these people have less representation than you, I'm not sure what that means to your average voter in Southern Virginia.
Well, have they said, like, or given a hint as to what their strategy is? I mean, so if they're sending people in the district, presumably they're door knocking. And if they're raising money, maybe that means they're doing media buys. When the person answers the door, what will they say? Will they say, like, it's so unfair, DC is denied representation? Will they say, hey, your member of Congress who you think is going up there doing your work is actually like messing around in municipal government of a city you don't even live in? Like, what's like, there's a sort of justice argument. There's your dude's wasting his time, wasting your time argument. Have they given a hint about that?
Yeah, they have. I mean, I haven't seen a script for what they're actually going to do when they knock on doors, but one of the activists who spoke at this event yesterday kind of gave a hint of it. He basically said, he has family in Goochland, Virginia, which is outside of Richmond, in this district, and he intends to say, people here have trouble getting jobs. There's a lot of infrastructure issues. There's other issues locally here, and meanwhile, John McGuire is worried about renovating DC's urban landscape and spending all this money on extra law enforcement here. Why isn't he focused on your local issues? And why is he so fixated on DC, which, for better or worse, you probably don't care that much about DC. So I think there is that sort of appeal to your, to this guy's wasting his time. And but I also think, the way, Robert White did frame it to me as he wants people to better understand the injustice of DC's situation. So I think it's probably a little bit of both.
I was also struck by the visuals from their rally or their event they had in Freedom Plaza. Right behind Robert White as he was speaking was a Palestine sign. And, whatever you think of that, it is not DC. And, I think a place with a more rigorously enforced message discipline would be like, whether it's Palestine or Ukraine or any other sort of cause, get that out of the shot because we don't want to have anything that anyone disagrees about.
I think the sign said from DC to Palestine occupation is a crime. Yeah.
But like that suggests to me there's sort of a broader pan-left thing going on.
Definitely. From the sort of network of Free DC, which is already kind of I think White was sort of trying to sell that as us all working together. The fact that Brooke Pinto was up there, who was his pretty bitter opponent in this race, he's trying to get everybody in DC who's against Congressional and Trump administration meddling on the same page. And there, statehood is very broadly popular. So
that's why it is. And that's why it struck me as odd to bring in other causes, because even if like 75% of people support another cause, 25% of people don't.
No, it's interesting. Yeah.
So talk to me about White himself. You spent a bunch of time with him. He was a longtime progressive member of the DC Council and going to be the replacement of Eleanor Holmes Norton. That was a bit of a surprise to him.
Yeah, that's right. Robert White's 44. He's, I'd say he kind of comes off like a natural politician. He's a pretty sort of slick talker. He's good at weaving in his personal narrative into his political goals. For a long time, if you knew him as if you understood his ambitions as a politician, you probably thought he was going to be running for mayor. He thought he was going to be running for mayor until about a year ago.
And why did he not run?
He basically, there's a couple different ways he tells the story. The first is that he says In the middle of the federal surge last summer, he was heading home from church with his wife, Christy, and he had been planning to run for mayor again. He ran for mayor in 2022, again, challenged Bowser in the primary. And in 2025, he'd been planning to run for mayor again. And his wife basically convinced him that the way she put it was, there won't be a mayor of DC at this rate because of all this, all these incursions into DC's autonomy from the federal government. And that just, it's an unenviable position. And where you really want to be is at the federal level. That's where the sort of fight is. And, that you should be on the Hill. You should go try to run for Norton's seat.
Well, I'm always skeptical of stories that elected officials tell that begin with, "I was driving home from church with my wife." Is there another version of the story of why he didn't run for mayor?
There is another version, and this was sort of suggested to me first in other interviews with people that he didn't tell it this way at first, that, he just saw some internal polling, or the way he described it to me in the end was that he heard murmurings of a poll that just showed he could not beat Bowser. And, I think it's reasonable to assume that it is also an unenviable place to be, and that there's something about when you wield the power of the mayor, you're responsible for the, compromises you have to make and the rough position that puts you in sometimes with your constituents, as we saw with Bowser. I think on the Hill, the Norton position, the delegate, is a little bit more symbolic. And historically, it was more about putting up a big symbolic fight and making compromises behind the scenes. But because of the lack of power that seat has, it kind of allows you to stick to your guns more, I think, on certain issues publicly.
In DC, something is changing. From 2023 to 2024, fatal opioid overdoses dropped by 33%. That's not a statistic. That's somebody's auntie, sister, father, neighbor, friend who is still here. Now, behind that number is a city that decided to fight back. And the DC Department of Behavioral Health is at the center of it, connecting people to prevention, treatment, and recovery services every single day. So whether you're trying to protect someone you love, find a way through your own battle, or simply understand what your community is going through, Know Your Path DC is here for you. Know your worth, know your alternatives, know your value, know yourself. Take it from me when I tell you recovery is possible. It happens every day in this city for real people. Learn more and find resources at knowyourpathdc.com.
What kind of image has he cut as a member of the council? He's known as a progressive. He's a very, very affable person. Where did he pick his fights? What was he known for as a member of the council? And how does this, either comport with or contradict some of the things he says he's going to do in Congress?
I think a lot of his signature bills or successes came pretty early on. He joined the council in 2016. In 2018, right after he won his first primary, the older of his two daughters was born, and they were looking for affordable childcare. His wife is an attorney. They're both extremely busy people and couldn't find anywhere affordable. So he then immediately started working on a bill with Vincent Gray that was meant to basically cut costs and raise pay for early childhood educators. The idea being that came from his own experience. Another bill that kind of improved services for returning citizens, people, formerly incarcerated people who often were exiting federal prisons and coming back into DC. That was inspired by his experience having a brother who had that experience, an older brother who he was very close to.
But these don't seem like fights, they're not. In DC, there weren't a lot of people on the no side of those issues. Are there places where he did take on interests that were able to defend themselves?
It appears to me that he has somewhat avoided some of the more staking out controversial positions. And I talked to some people who used to work for him in the council who felt that that was very much so that he wouldn't because he had his eye on the next election and he didn't want to have points where people could hit him, that he was pragmatic, but also trying to make everyone happy all the time. And one person told me that the result was that no one was happy who worked for him, because they wanted him to stake out more progressive positions generally, because I think he had a reputation as a progressive when he entered council, and he maintained that. But I think unlike someone like I guess Charles Allen or Janice Lewis George, he maybe refrained from associating himself with some of the more controversial sort of bills or projects that the council had.
What's their relationship like?
Janice and him? It seems to me to be close. The night that they both won their primaries, he went to her party as soon as he got done giving his victory speech, and she looked like she was on the verge of winning. And he gave her like a long bear hug, and he told me the next day that, or I guess it was maybe 2 days later, that he really wanted to see a close relationship between his office, the delegate's office, and the mayor's office, and with the council. That he kind of thinks that the mayor's, that Bowser's office has been sort of too isolated from both, and a little bit not taking feedback from both in the proper way.
That seems to ignore the elephant in the room, which is that the person who's been the DC congressional delegate has been a much diminished figure, aging, out to lunch, not all there, however you want to put that. And White, the one thing that seems like an actually brave thing to do, it shouldn't have had to be brave, but is that he ran against the legendary Eleanor Holmes Norton before she had officially, announced that she was going to call it quits. And it was this moment where, you wrote about this too, where everyone is saying like, my God, she's got to not run again, but nobody wanted to be the one who is like publicly identified giving her the shove. And he, was willing to take that risk.
I mean, so what he told me is that he had people in her office who he knew well who were telling him beyond a shadow of a doubt that she will not run again. So I think my understanding is that he had some information that we didn't have access to that made it pretty clear that she was going to step aside, and that he wouldn't be in the position of running against his former mentor and boss for very long. He did appear to be in that position, though. And when I asked him about it at the time, he had to handle it very delicately. I mean, and so did Brooke Pinto. I mean, they both said they both were very careful about giving her all credit and refraining from really criticizing her, even though a lot of casual conversations I had with plenty of people in DC at the time were just, people were baffled by why she had not stepped down yet.
But listen, one of the things that made her very effective was a sense that she had the whole Hill wired. So if there was some, idea that BC wasn't going to like percolating somewhere among Republican staffers, she would be able to get ahead of it, and had relationships with at least some of the leadership that she could use to like ward off stuff that was going to be a nightmare procedurally. And that sense of being wired and those relationships frayed, maybe because she was aging, maybe because the current Republican leadership are less interested in having them. Is there evidence in White's career that those kinds of relationships and that kind of like intel network is a thing he can do? Relationships not with friends or coalition partners, but with people who are really coming from a different place.
I mean, I think on the DC Council, you don't have that many opportunities to show that kind of experience. Yeah. I think it's a bunch of Democrats. Kinney Zalesny, who ran against Pinto and White in the delegate race in the primary and did not get close to their margins, but criticized both of them for not having any experience working with Republicans, because she had worked in national politics. There's not really a blueprint for like what your experience is supposed to be going into this role of delegate. I mean, there's only been two others before this. Walter Fauntleroy was like a civil rights leader. He ended up helping found the Congressional Black Caucus. People forget, but Norton was not endorsed by the Washington Post. She was kind of somewhat ran as an outsider because she wasn't involved in DC municipal politics at all. She was a Georgetown law professor at the time and had also done some, had worked in national politics and had worked in Mayor Lindsay's administration in New York. But she, adjusted to it, and other candidates at the time knocked her for having no experience in DC politics. She only had experience in at the sort of federal level. I guess it's difficult to sort of extrapolate because there's so few previous examples. But I think, in answer to your question, I don't think White has had a lot of experience working with Republicans in politics.
So that brings us back to the group that he announced this week, Defend DC, before I let you go. Is it going to make it easier, harder for him up there on the Hill to do his job with colleagues who know that he has been out there campaigning against them or maybe out there campaigning against them?
The truth is that, House Democrats may not really need his help to win this. They don't. So I think committee assignments can be better. You're sure to get a vote in this process called Committee of the Whole, which is symbolic or informal vote that the entire House takes and that delegates and representatives from Puerto Rico and like the U.S. Virgin Islands can vote in. Although actually Republicans have allowed that in the last few Congresses as well. But I think it gives you a leg up. Your allies become more powerful. Of course, if there's a Democratic House majority, I don't know that anyone will specifically fault him for campaigning for Democrats. I think that's sort of the logical move for someone who's looking for more DC, for fighting for DC autonomy.
You quote this University of Maryland historian who said, everyone who has entered this role, which as you note is only two people, has to reinvent it for their own purposes. Here's White, who has both sort of engaged in talk as if he's like a civil rights organizer, and also talked a lot more about like, I'm going to help make DC affordable, like real sort of not Congress kind of stuff, like mayor level stuff. He's trying to do both. Is that a realistic? According to the people you talk to, that seems like a pretty broad waterfront to cover.
I think if he's in Congress I doubt he'll be in Congress for as long as Eleanor Holmes Norton has been, just because few people are. But if he's in Congress for a long time, I think she's been able to accomplish both in some ways, in little pieces. I think they're kind of both your purview. I think, for example, he talks a lot about trying to fight for funding to get more federal jobs back in DC, to transfer land owned by the federal government to DC so that it can develop affordable housing and sort of wharf or RFK Stadium style developments. I think those things are his way into talking about sort of kitchen table issues for Washingtonians. And I think because he really originally, his style of politics came from when he was interested in running for mayor. He first joined the council because he thought that the sort of development boom in DC in the late 2000s was not benefiting people east of the river or sort of east of the park. And so I think like that's still his frame for what he wants to accomplish. And then there's just something that you have to get done first, which is make sure DC doesn't get taken over by the federal government or Republicans. So it's sort of like, I think he'd probably like to be working in a different environment, but who wouldn't?
Realistically speaking, because he's made a big show of wanting to help the Democratic Party gain control of Congress. In the next 2 years, with Trump remaining in the White House, what threats to D.C., as he sees them, will Democratic control of Congress cause to go away?
I think there are some frivolous sort of things like the Republican congressman who wants to prevent D.C. from being able to ban or require motorcycle riders to wear helmets. Things like that, they can be introduced, but I don't think they're really going to go anywhere. I think Trump has shown many times that he will just, if he's interested in changing some aspect of DC's physical landscape, which seems to be his biggest interest at the moment, that he will just start work on it in one way or another. And so I don't know, what Democratic control of the House can really change in that regard. I do think it'll allow Democrats to get more people to sort of explain themselves and more hearings, more scrutiny. But functionally, I'm not really sure.
Ike, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We will be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.